Okay, we're recording now. So welcome everyone. We will start properly in just a couple of minutes, just waiting for a few more people to join us. In the meantime, as usual, with CMS in Touch event, if you put just your name where you're joining from us today in the chat, that will give other people a bit of more of a sense of what sort of a group we are today and where everyone is based. And it's a nice way of kind of meeting new people as well. First, glimpsing them on CMS in Touch.
It's nice to see people saying that the UK is sunny today.
I know we basically had winter for like what, 9 months?
Yeah.
Or possibly it was autumn, really wet patch of autumn, very, very depressing. Oh, wonderful. So I think we're now ready to start proper, but please, if you're just joining, do introduce yourself in chat. Hopefully one of the points of this book is to build a community around doing research methods differently, reimagining that, challenging that. So it's always nice for us to meet each other and build some momentum. For us, it's much more like a political epistemological project as well as just a book. You know, it's always nice to think more broadly about these things. So yeah, but actually, let's start now and say a proper good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're located. Nice thing about CMS in Touch, it's truly global. So welcome everyone, whatever time of day or night it is. We're delighted to see you all here because obviously we are very excited about this event. I'm wearing two hats at the moment. I'm wearing the CMS in Touch hat and introducing this event. I'm also wearing the an editor hat with Marco. There at the top, at least in my screen, you're at the top, Marco. So he is an editor as well. So very excited about this event and starting this project. And I hope as many of you become part of it as possible. Okay. I think, Marco, you're managing the slides,
I think
right?
I can, yes, just tell me.
You move it on, please.
Yes,
To the next slide.
see if they move. Okay. Let
Right,
me check
so,
if everything is under control. Yes, okay.
Yeah, so I might need to do Chris Whitty and say, next slide, please. So yes, we're talking today about doing research methods differently, which is an edited book Marco and I are doing. We already have a signed contract with Routledge, and it's part of the, I'll say in a moment, it's part of the broader book series, Routledge book series on doing academia differently. Next slide, please. So we just have a simple sort of agenda for today. We'll tell you first a little bit about the book series, because again, that's the series is part of the same sort of community of doing academia differently as, oh, I've got a bit of an echo. Could I just ask, if you're not currently speaking, please mute yourself. I think that's where the echo might be coming from. Is that better? I think it is. Perfect. Yes, I'll tell you a little bit about the book series first, because it's about that broader movement and community to do things differently in academia. And we'll tell you more about the book and the call and then how to contribute. And then we'll just throw the doors open for questions and engagement and discussion. Because one of the great things about this book, we wanted to make it as open as possible so that we can collectively shape it. You know, nothing is set in stone apart from the basic sort of principle and idea. Next slide, please, Marco. Okay, so first a bit about the series, because I said that I'm wearing two hats, but actually I'm wearing three hats because I'm also one of the editors of the book series. And the book series is about doing academia differently. And the book series actually started with a previous book that Sarah Robinson, Olivier Rattle, and myself published, I think earlier this, was it? No, it was last year. I'm losing track of time. And it was about doing academic careers differently. And similar to this book that Marco and I are doing now, it's an edited book. We issued an open call for chapters for that. We didn't want just, you know, to invite our mates. We wanted to recognize that in order to do something truly differently, we need to be truly open. And so everybody is welcome, everybody is invited. And we, as a result of doing that, we received, for that book, we received like approximately 80 abstract submissions. And in the end, sadly, we had to be selective, and we ended up publishing 46 chapters in that book. But anyway, it turned out to be a very popular idea. So we've now turned it into a book series. And the book series basically aims to kind of coalesce this movement that is currently gathering around trying to fight back against narrow prescriptions of excellence and how to do things in academia, fight back against sort of managerialism and linearity and this kind of expectations, unreasonable expectations that are placed on us, which result in the dominance of particular ways of doing things. And not just to critique them, but to actively imagine alternatives. So probably the most famous strand of that movement is writing differently. That's been around for probably the longest. So we kind of like, that's part of doing academia differently. But with this book series, we want to broaden it out and actually look at all different kinds of academia and how we can do them differently, publishing differently, teaching differently, doing research methods differently. So researching differently, leading in academia differently, whatever you can think of, it's open to that. And the idea behind the book series, like individual books within it, it's always open call. So anybody can submit a book proposal. We are open to any book format that Routledge can publish. It can be edited or authored. It can focus, as I said, on any aspect of academia. It must take a critical approach to established conventions. And as I said previously, not just critique them, but actually focus more substantively of how we can do things differently. And any edited book within it must be an open call. We also encourage creativity and imagination. So if you have a particularly creative ideas, for example, the first book we published, Doing Academic Careers Differently, was based around this idea of portraits and galleries. And so the whole book is presented as a portrait gallery that the readers are wandering around at will. So this is the background of the series in which our book that we're talking about today is also part. And that QR code, if you're interested in the book series as well as in the book that we're talking about today, that if you scan that QR code at the top, it will take you to a call for book proposals as well. Okay, next slide, please. That was a pitch for the series and also a context explanation for the book. So this book is going to be, as Kristen, who is here, knows, is going to be a third book in the series. We actually have a second book on the go, which is why I've picked on Kristen temporarily. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words, Kristen, but don't worry if that puts you on the spot.
Good morning. Yes, we're very happy. So me and my colleague, Nicholas Deal, are working on a book about starting academia differently. And we have about 40 contributors to that volume. So we're very excited about that book. And thank you for letting us be part of the project.
Thanks very much, Kristen. Sorry for pushing you on the spot. It's always nice if you can talk about your own book yourself. So we're very excited to have that book as part of the series and hope it will help early career academics to find new paths through academia and do academia differently when they're just starting out. Okay, so this is the third book then, Doing Research Methods Differently. And we build on the principles of the series and we seek overall to create the sort of a post-methodological compendium that could act as the source of new ideas, inspiration, and legitimacy for those who want to do research differently, focusing specifically on research methods. And that means a range of things, which we'll talk about in a moment, but not just inventing new methods, not just exposing how methods are really done beyond sort of the smooth narratives that we see in methods sections, but actually going deeper and reimagining methods and even questioning whether we need research methods and whether we have too much by way of research methods, and that dominates kind of and narrows research in specific ways. So that's kind of the general idea. And I think, Marco, do you want to take over from here? And
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And it's very good to see this interest in our book, and it's so good to see that many people are interested in discussing and thinking about methodologies. So I'm going to pick up what Alex was just saying about and start talking about what was the idea behind, what was our influence when we started thinking about this book. So I think we started actually from what Alex was just saying, what was the aim of our book, what we wanted to do with this book. So we had these 3 points, and then we, as I will explain to you, are converted into 3 questions. So basically what we wanted to do is like create a space or a platform for academics. They wanted to show first thing, our research methods are already done differently, because as Alex was saying, there are lots of different methods, lots of way of approaching research. So we wanted to kind of give space for all those who felt that they were doing something different, that they were doing something that was going beyond the established norm and expectation. So this was one, and probably the first aim that we had. Then, moving on from this, we also wanted to create a space, and again, a platform to invite new ideas and proposal on how we can reimagine research methods and the doing of research method in a different way, in a more creative and joyful way that goes beyond, traditions, convention, and some sort of conservatism in methodology. And as we will say also in the way we write about research, the way we present our research to various audiences. But then we also had a more radical objective, which is about provoking debates, kind of create provocations and discussions about the alternative to this idea of the dominance of method and methodocentrism, and start thinking in, can we move beyond methods? Can we move beyond the idea of methodologies? So this is probably the most radical area of our objective and the ideas that we have behind this book. So why, moving a little bit more around the literature behind this, that informed our reasoning, we felt that this book was important. In some way, it was necessary to kind of create this space for a series of debates that are now very common in academia, where despite the now more common call for openness, creativity, pluralism in methodology, there is still some kind of a level of, as I was saying, conservatism and some preference for methodological convention and methodocentrism. This can be explained in various ways. Probably what we felt was relevant was this idea that the culture and the pressure to publish or perish is in some way influencing the way we think about our research, the way we feel that we can be courageous in presenting our research and thinking about our research. So, for example, it is clear that it's easy if you it's easy to publish if you create a paper that is based on a very on a conventional methodology. When I say conventional methodology, I'm talking about those methodologies that are widely accepted and that are considered to be the most secure. So we wanted to kind of think in this terms. So high-ranked journals are still they still prefer positivist-oriented research to some extent, despite the call for openness. So this also influences the way we present our research, and actually the methodological sections and the way we present our research in terms of as a smooth process, a very organized process, and this creates some kind of, we tend to hide the messiness and chaotic nature of the research process. We are in our reasoning also, we were influenced by a lot of different research approaches and methodological traditions and philosophical traditions. So, for example, we were inspired by Feyerabend epistemological anarchism and the challenge to any form of dogmatism in research. We are influenced by post-structuralist and postmodernist questioning of the idea that the research is a process based on rationality, that the researcher is always a rational being behind the research process. We are also interested in, we were influenced by post-colonial critiques of Western ways of producing knowledge and the paradigm of knowledge production as a Western dominated space. And we also influenced by feminist methodologies and research approaches, feminist new materialism, and questioning of the idea of the human in control. And in my case, personally, I'm very interested in how, if we think about it, we are not always in control of the research process. And sometimes we have to think about how the research process in itself shows agency. We are also interested in post-qualitative critique of positivation of qualitative research and non-representational methodologies. One important thing to say, and this list is not a prescriptive list of topics and tradition that we want to, that we are interested in with. We are open to many, many, many different perspectives. So this is definitely is not a prescriptive list. So feel free to explore different areas, different takes on methodologies and the challenges of how we think about methodology in our research. So these are the questions that are related to our aim. And we created this question even for giving way for potential authors to think about the way they shape their contribution. So if you have an idea and you can think about how it fits in one of these, how can contribute by answering to one of these three questions. So the first one is, what is already done differently in research? So how your research, your idea for a chapter speaks about what is already done differently. The second one, and how can research methods be reimagined? So here we kind of invite proposal for chapters that focus on moving forward, different ways and new ideas or thinking about methodologies. And then the more radical one, what happened after? Can we go beyond the idea of methods and methodocentrism? Again, this is a bit more of a provocation. So we don't have an answer. We are open to many different perspectives on these topics. So as I was saying, for the various influences that contributed in our thinking about this book, these also are open questions. And we are inviting you to reflect on this and play with these ideas, to think about your contribution, your idea of the methodology. So do we want to go together with this? Or we want to, I think I've already speak a little bit more about this, but let's go through this quickly. So in referring to question 1, we can think in this way: our research already done differently? What happens behind the polished account of research, typically presented in method section and methodology chapters? What alternative way of communicating research methods that convey the lived complexity have already been tried and explored? And how can others learn and take inspiration from such approaches? So these are the kind of ways of understanding the question, and as a way to shape and think about your abstract and then chapter, and so your contribution. So reflecting on question 2, how can research methods be reimagined? How can we imagine research methods to move away from proceduralism and towards creativity and openness? How can methods play a positive role in facilitating the research process that is meaningful, joyful, and fun? And what hope is there for more creative and less prescriptive ways of doing research methods which liberate rather than burden researchers? So then for our more critical question, is there research after method and methodocentrism? What possibilities are there for post-methodological or anti-methodological approaches to research and writing? What forms might such research take? What tension might arise? And how can this tension be confronted? And what are the potential implications? So these are the question of the book. And these are the areas that we invite you to reflect on when you think about your chapter. Ale, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also just thanks, Marco. And also just to add to that list, like Marco has been emphasizing, it's not an exclusive list. These are just basically prompts for you to think about. You feel free to go beyond these prompts. We can imagine a scenario where a book will be like basically shaped in terms of 3 parts, one for each question. But we also can imagine a scenario where the book looks completely different, depending on what proposals you send in, right? So this is just a starting point and prompts, as we said, rather than you must do something about it. The most important thing is that your chapter is about doing things differently in one way or another. So just moving on in terms of how to contribute, first of all, to emphasize again, it's an open call, so absolutely everyone is welcome. We anticipate that most contributions will come from business schools, but we also really welcome proposals from beyond business schools as well. So again, in the Doing Academic Careers Differently book, we ended up with that sort of mix. We ended up with most chapters being from within business and management, but we also end up for really interesting chapters from maths, out of all places, you know, and not to mention philosophy, psychology, sociology. What else did we have? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it gives you an idea. We had one chapter that was a dialogue between academics in English and in maths, which was fascinating. So again, really open to all sorts of disciplinary orientations. If you have a colleague from a different faculty or part of the university that you think it would be really exciting to write with, then that's absolutely fine. If you have colleagues in other parts of universities that you know are working on relevant stuff and exciting stuff, and you want to send this call to, again, you're really welcome to do so. Basically, we think the more diverse, the better in all aspects, because then we'll end up with the most kind of exciting and radical differences, right? So, so yes, completely open. It's not a big commitment to start with, because we're just asking for a maximum 500-word abstract by September, just to give us an idea of what you're thinking, but also kind of to give us a sense to start planning the book and look at what's emerging, to give us an opportunity to help you shape your ideas and make sure that, you know, you don't commit to writing a full chapter and then it needs to be changed radically. So just a 500-word abstract. Eventually it will become a full paper of 5,000 words. That's including references. So not a long, shorter than an article. Because we found another thing with the Doing Academic Careers Differently book, it was often actually the shorter chapters that were the most exciting, because we had some chapters that were like 2,000 words, and they're really, really thought-provoking. We had some in the form of poetry, for example, and that really, you know, made people think differently. So it's not about the length. Again, it's about the provocation, the difference, etc. Both individual and collective reflections are welcome. So again, thinking about the first book in the series, we have everything ranging from one person's reflections to, I think the one chapter was written by something like 12 academics working together, and it was great. Both were great. So again, open to a range of experiences where, for example, in terms of reflections on doing methods differently. And I remember from one of the questions from the form that we gave you the opportunity to fill in, outlining your initial ideas, one of the questions was, is it okay to write about failing to do research methods differently? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Yeah, so we want to expose the messiness of existing methods, but also the messiness of attempts to do things differently. Because we feel like that also helps the community who is interested in doing things differently to actually be honest and consider the difficulties that we are facing, because only by facing up to those difficulties we have a hope of overcoming them somehow. So yes, it can also be proposals as well as reflections of doing methods. It can also be proposals for reimagining methods or going beyond methods and what comes after them. Really important, as we already mentioned, a range of formats and writing styles are welcome. Again, someone who filled in the form had a question about that. Is it okay not to use any references? And that's absolutely fine. Is it okay to write a provocative essay? Yes, that's absolutely fine. In some ways, the more provocative, the better. Just make sure you're not kind of personally offensive to people, because I think that's where we draw the line. So provocation rather than hurting people is the key. Because at the end of the day, we want to persuade people to join us rather than to seriously upset them to no good effect. So yes, range of formats, and it's great if you think about how the format and the style of what you're writing reflects the content of what you're saying and the message you're trying to convey. So if you're writing about very creative methods, and we had several good ideas submitted about arts-based methods, for example, it would be really great if your way of presenting that would also be kind of art-based and creative in some ways. Just to give an example, if you're writing about poetry, why not incorporate poetry in writing about poetry, that sort of stuff. So we very much encourage creativity, use of metaphors, writing differently, etc., etc. The only restraint is what can be put in a printed book. So sadly, we were constrained with the first book, and it's going to be the same because it's the same publisher, and just generally it's kind of the format of a published book, is that when it appears in a printed form, any pictures will be black and white. Also, if you're including pictures in a Routledge format, a picture like a half-page spread of a picture is an equivalent of 500 words. So you just would need to take that into account when you think about the word limit for the full paper. Obviously, you don't need to think about now for abstract, but just something to bear in mind. That's something that caught us out because we thought we were somewhere with the word limit, and then we ended up lots of pictures because we did have lots of pictures, and then it added up a whole lot more word count. And yes, we had to negotiate with the publisher or extending the word limit. So just something to bear in mind. But overall, what we're really trying to create is a kind of an immersive book format that would enable readers to really kind of get into it and explore and experience research journeys in kind of unexpected, surprising ways where we can really rediscover and reaffirm passion, creativity, and freedom, dare we say it, of research, which is sometimes something of a treasure in this day and age. Okay, Marco, shall we move to the next page?
Not sure why. Sometimes it doesn't go. Okay.
So this is a bit of a boring bit, but probably an important bit. So abstract submission deadline is 2nd of September. It says just up to 500 words. We basically just want to see your idea of what you're thinking of doing. We'll then get back to you by the end of November, and then the full chapters will be required by May next year, 2025. If you want to read more about what we've just talked about, then if you scan that QR code, it will take you to our full call for chapters, which the link to that was also in the CMS and Touch emails that went out advertising this event. But if for some reason you're struggling to find it, just email Mark or myself, and we'll point you to the right direction. Okay. And I think we've now arrived at the exciting point in time when Mark and I stopped talking, and we might even take the slides down temporarily in a moment, so we can all see each other a bit better. And we just open up the floor to you for your questions and ideas. As I said, we've received quite a few submissions through the online form, which was great to see. We've read it all. We've formed opinion on it all. We don't necessarily want to expose the people who've sent us questions, just in case you don't want to be like publicly spoken to by us. So if you have sent us an idea and you want the question answered now, it would be better also for the purposes of the recording. So people, when they watch this recording, they know what questions we're answering. It would be better if you could ask your question out loud again. Or if you have a chapter idea that you want to share now, also you're very welcome to do so. And if you want any clarification or any other question related to the book or indeed to the book series. So yes, we are in an interactive format, which means that all of you should have the permission to just speak freely. So do ask your questions out loud. Just maybe raise your hand so we can see the order, and I can see Laura is already first one. So Marco, do you think you could
I can stop in sharing the screen.
and we'll pop them back up in a moment. Great, thank you. Okay, Laura, I think you were first. First to the start.
Thanks. So I start with what I think is a really easy question. After seeing this call, I have two separate joint projects, one with a colleague, one with an ex-student, and particularly the one with the ex-student. He would really like to be involved with this. He is outside of academia, but it is going to be, if we put in an abstract, it is going to be based on his dissertation work and talking about sort of like potential methods, so not methods that have actually been used in a sort of a piece of scholarly work at PhD level or above. Would that still fit within what you're looking for?
I think you said easy question because you probably already anticipated the answer. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, because it's about reimagining. It would fall into reimagining methods in new ways, right? So potential fits perfectly in that regards. What's your view, Marco?
No, yeah, it's the same. And I was also thinking that it might be very interesting to understand why these methods have not been developed. So what is the potential for this method to kind of become something that gives ideas to others? So definitely, it's a great idea, and I will definitely support such an idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Super. Rafia, I think you're next. Please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you. I did write 3 long questions in the chat, but I appreciate the opportunity to say them out loud. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, I'm very new to doing research methods, doing research differently. So how do we really write a chapter on only doing the methodology, and could it be about struggling with the methodology and not having the required support or publication platforms and just giving up on it because of the methodology? So it's just like a comparison going on in my head, and the way that we did our research project, that it just fell because the methodology was not seen as strong enough and traditional enough. So that's one aspect of the question. And the second are there samples of research papers that you could show us, please, where the focus is on the research methodology and not on the research papers? Because in my head, I find it hard to separate them. So without showing you the findings of the research journey, how do we only talk about the research methodology? It's just, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafi, for your question. Actually, it's a very interesting question. Actually, it's because it speaks about what is the difference between a methodological chapter and an empirical chapter represent a methodology. What I would say is that it can be both, in terms of the fact that it can be answering first to your second question, because it was easy for me to pick up and then continue to the other aspect. It can be a reflection on the methodology, a reflection on for example, the philosophy behind the methodology and how it can be thought differently and how that fit into the procedure and going beyond the procedure. But it can be also an example of how the method and the research was done differently. Okay, so it's up to, you spoke about your experience of a paper that was not considered, methodologically sound. And that, I think, is exactly the point. What was the challenge? What was the problem with the methodology? How can we think about that failure to rethink the methodology? That would be my way of thinking around that. And actually, also at the beginning, you were saying, is the methodology or the research approach. I think for this call for chapters, we are open of different takes on what it is, the methodology, the methods, the analytical strategy. So it can be the different parts depending on what was the issue, for example, in your experience. Was it because it was not, I don't know, what was the problem with the methodology?
Thank you. I think I need to go back and read the call for chapters again. I think it's a good fit, the call for the book, what it's asking, and my bad experience with the methodology is what it's about. So thank you for clarifying that, but I just need to figure out how to do it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and if I can just add to that as well, I think it links to what we were saying earlier about failure, right? So when things going wrong, so you know, when things go wrong with methodology, it's absolutely exposing the messiness of it. So it's very relevant because it kind of falls into perhaps our first questions of how things are already done differently, because it's not what we see in these polished method sections. Yeah, that everybody reads in journal and say, wow, everybody's doing these methods, you know, in a much more proficient way than I've been doing, because when I do methods, it all goes wrong all the time. It's about kind of showing what actually happens, you know, the actual lived experiences of trying to do methods and things actually always going wrong and having to fix things and reimagine things. So I think it would fall under that. In terms of balancing, well, in terms of thinking, how do I separate methods from the empirical findings? I think I agree with Marco. It's a very interesting question, and that in itself could be a chapter. Can we actually separate the two, right? Is it a false distinction? Again, we are asked to separate them out into distinct sections when we write journal papers, for example, right? We need to have a methodology section, and we need to have a finding sections. But is this a false divide, actually? Are we forcing the two into separate ways where actually they're completely intermixed and interrelated, and we're doing violence to our research by trying to do it that way? So, and I think that you can, in terms of practically how you write about that, you can write in all sorts of ways. You can challenge that, or you probably want to summarize a little bit about what you've done, what it was about, just to give the readers a context. But in terms of how you take it forward from there, there are all sorts of ways. And probably people on this call are probably now thinking, oh, I think I might do it this way or this way. So, you know, we probably can have a discussion about how you could do it in different ways. I hope that helps.
And just to add, like another thing that comes to my mind is, like, for me, the thing that I found very interesting about the failure, if you want to call it failure, is the learning from that. Because there's something, who says that there was a failure? Was it really a failure? So, you know, it's like when our work is judged, assessed, or reviewed by someone else. I mean, there is an whole baggage of things that we bring into the research that sometimes we are so hopeful about this, and we feel that this thing was so strong, and then we realize that for someone else it wasn't that good, let's say. And that, for me, start, you know, the creative thinking. Why was an issue? What I can go to? Should I be like stubborn and I defend my view? So yeah, this would be great for me.
I'd like to add here, please, that so we tried a methodology and we did have a conference paper out of it, but then I was like, I don't know where to publish it, and we just let it drop there. And now I'm just attending the webinar, and I found this call for book chapter. So I am not giving up. I'm not going back to quantitative traditional research methods. So it's not failure in that sense. It's just finding out where to sell it and where it belongs, rather than, yeah, you can't force me to go back to quantitative traditional research.
That's great. We're glad we're giving you a way forward, Rafi, and definitely don't give up. And if you want to discuss it in more detail, we can always just you just drop us a line and we can talk like in more detail as well. Fides, would you like to go ahead? I think you are next with the question.
Okay, thank you. I did my PhD research on exploring leadership and followership through dance. And I did that with a group of participants over a series of workshops over 2 months. And I ended up with a huge amount of data, very much sensory data, as well as written data, as well as recordings and so on and so forth. And it was a massive struggle to get that into written language. And I haven't submitted anything to you yet because I haven't had time. Stop. I'm wondering whether that would be a topic. On the one hand, we are encouraged to research differently, and I've looked at various ways of sensory methodologies, you know, Sarah Pink and so on. But then you're still supposed to squeeze it into that linear representation of written language. Now, I've also been thinking about language is the only way we can communicate insights. Well, it's not the only way. I can communicate some insights in an embodied way, in a physical way, but that means I have to be with somebody. I can't do it's not, and it would be a much smaller number of people. So there are constraints on that. So I was grappling with that kind of not dichotomy, whatever, I can't find the word. It's almost like a paradox. On the one hand,
tension, dilemma.
You learn and you research in a sensory way, and then basically all that sensory stuff falls by the wayside and gets reduced to letters on a page. Is that something that might be of interest, that would fit into your remit?
I think both Marco and I are nodding violently.
And there's another aspect to it. In that time, I'm not neurotypical, so for me that was even more difficult. So if you see the world through a different lens, if you're neurodiverse, divergent, whatever, and you experience the world in a different way, in a very sort of multi-dimensional way, and then you have to sort of squeeze everything into a very sort of at best two-dimensional vehicle, communication vehicle. So yeah, I'm thinking. Sorry, I'm thinking aloud. I was wondering whether to put that into a paper.
You already have some fan mail in the chat. I think people are very keen on what you're saying, and I think for my part, and I see because Marco is nodding as well, I think that would make a really, really good chapter, really interesting and fascinating, just exploring these dilemmas and tensions. And I'm even thinking, can we do something creative? And disclaimer, haven't run it past Routledge, but can we do something creative, like incorporating some QR codes into the text of your chapter that would
That's what I did. That's what I did in my thesis.
Oh, there you go.
Include some QR codes so that people click on that, and actually that they lead them to video snippets.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
For example.
Yeah, well, there we go, on the same length as wavelength. So I think that would be really, really, really cool. Forgive for the use of this word cool, but I'll hand over to Marco.
The one thing that I found really interesting about what you said is that at the end, when doing research, then writing about that, is like translating something complex as a, as real life experience, or is a performance, is a relationship. And then we always have to kind of translate it and transform it into a very simplified version of what it was. And I think that that is one of the main problem with, probably for me, that was one of the inspiration behind the ideas of this book, because you always feel when you're writing about the methodology that you are doing something to what happened not in a very good way, because you are reducing everything into sentences, paragraphs, and a series of steps. While, because I did my PhD research, for example, was on ethnography, and I have a lot of data that I wasn't able to use, because you still have to make it smaller than it was, and you have to simplify. And then I started thinking, why are we doing that? Is that because there is no way out from this? Is that because this is how the academic world works, and then you have to write papers at the end? Is that because writing papers is better than doing a video or a movie or a documentary? There are kind of lots of different ways of thinking about that, and this was kind of, in some way, it's a constraint, but it also pushes you to think about alternatives, and challenge these kind of, probably these are the kind of the conventions that we are so used to that we don't even think about how can it be different one day. So yeah, it was super interesting, and I would definitely suggest you to kind of
Thank you.
continue thinking about that.
Please send us that abstract. That sounds really amazing. Joshua, I believe you are next with the raised hand.
Okay, thank you. It's so exciting, Alexandra and Marco. I'm very, very keen. I came across the call for chapters the other day on Twitter randomly, and yeah, so sounds amazing. I wasn't aware that it had a particular focus in business management, but I'm glad to hear that there's that openness for other disciplines. I guess I wanted to ask about, my main question relates to the fact that I'm from the medical sciences. So, our discipline's probably part of why, the publishing sector is not accommodating for other disciplines, since there tends to be that monopoly and domination. But I guess I have an idea for a chapter that does do research methods differently within quite an empiricist discipline. However, I worry that because medical science does have the privilege of being, very well looked after by the academic system, that in general, the conversations we have about method within this discipline is nowhere near as mature as the conversations that I'm hearing today from other disciplines, particularly more related on the humanities end of the spectrum. So I guess my question is, would you be interested in something with more of a disciplinary focus in a more empiricist discipline that looks at a reimagining a method within those disciplines, even though in a much wider conversation, it probably still looks like baby steps in a sense?
So Joshua, I'm so glad you joined us, and I would be very personally, I mostly ask Marco what he thinks as well in a moment. But I mean, I was really glad to see those chapters from other disciplines in our first book. And one of the things we were amazed by is actually how similar the issues were across disciplines in the end. So, and I was saying chapters from maths and English were fascinating, but also there was much more commonality. And I think what it helps us to realize, we have common struggles across the university, and it would be really interesting to tease that out with regards to methods as well. So personally, I would be very welcoming, as long as it's about doing methods, as long as it speaks to the spirit of the call and explores that. Maybe we'll see how, when it appears, when your ideas form, whether we can make those wider connections more implicit across the disciplines. So, but I think I would be very, very welcoming to your ideas. What do you think, Marco?
Yes, basically, I agree with everything you said, and I was thinking if it can be helpful for you in thinking, if you are writing about your methodology in your specific area, as Alex was saying, it needs to be, of course, something in terms of doing methods differently, and also think about the fact that we are speaking to a community of people that are in some way not happy anymore about how methods are done, and we write about methods and so on. So we want to say something, we want to have a space to speak about that. So because I think that there is no one says that people from business and management cannot learn from medical science, and how you do, you know, your research, and how that can be a source of inspiration even for, you know, is this kind of dialogue that I think we love to create. There is something that I like. I like the idea of being undisciplined in terms of the fact that we should be undisciplined methodologists for this book, in terms of the fact that we are speaking it because we have a background somewhere and we want to speak about our audience, but we're also speaking to someone else because we can create a dialogue. For example, I studied psychology before doing business and management, and I come from a very positivist background of clinical psychology, statistics, and so on. And from that, I was able to think differently about what I'm doing now in terms of new materialist, Deleuzean inspired research, because that is the kind of dialogue that I think is creates a good terrain for creativity. So yes, it may be a very interesting conversation that can start.
Thank you both.
Okay. I think we have a few questions in the chat. I'm sorry, keeping an eye on the chat is a bit challenging. But I see there's a question from Fidel. Fidel, would you mind asking your question out loud for the benefit of the recording? It sounds, I think it sounds, I know a bit about what you do, because Fidel is our colleague at the OU, and it sounds like it could fit in very well, but it would really help if you could ask the question out loud, if you don't mind.
Yes, I don't mind. And thank you, Alex and Marco, for inviting me last minute. So I feel some sort of imposter syndrome, because I don't think I wasn't aware until I don't know how many hours ago, maybe less than 48. But you know, I just been asking myself, because I do a bit of work which is orthoethnographic, meaning that I have spent so many years in the voluntary sector, and I have a feeling that I have got a lot of knowledge which is not tapped into. So, but the conventional wisdom suggests that literally you commission a research project, because I'm a qualitative researcher. You go, you get the information, and then you analyze it and you produce your paper, which on paper seems very simple. But because I have been accumulating a lot of information, sometimes I get things which are interesting, and the only way I can exploit them and then use my own lived experience is actually developing. I use portraits. I work with an artist who is a friend of mine, so because passionate about the things I do. And what I do then is develop some typologies on portraits, which then I use for my own knowledge exchange activities, which I have many of them, which eventually brought me to this whole idea of ethnographic theoretical dialogue, where you actually have some material which you use for your knowledge exchange. The question then becomes, can I use the data I gather through knowledge exchange activities, which in theory they are not you know, you are not doing research. You probably don't have an ethical review and so forth. You can see all the things it brings up, but at the same time, you know, I generate a lot of data. Should I just be ignoring it, or should I be using it? So the only way I can publish and use it is if I break the rules and try to do my methods differently, whereby I incorporate everything I do, my social practices outside academia, as part of my own research, because I can't see how I can separate myself from being an academic and an activist, because I am one of all four of them. And I think the whole idea of pushing me to be one or the other is something I probably don't agree with. And the only way I can do it is by, you know, challenging the status quo and bringing in some new ideas. I think that's enough, Alex.
Thank you, Fidel. I want that chapter now. And I think you've picked up on something really important, that how our research how we do research, how it ties up with our identity as academics, right, and who we are. And I think that's a really important aspect. Obviously what you're doing is really creative, but it's more than just creative because of those connections and because it goes deep down to why you do research. And I think that's something that a lot of people will identify with. So yeah, I'm very, very keen, but I'll let Marco respond as well.
Yeah, because I thought, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Fidel, for your intervention. I think that there are two things. One is definitely the idea, the identity of the researcher. How can we separate? Do we have to develop different identities when we do our research? Is it possible to separate research from real life, or if something like real life exists, separated from research? Is that a way of speaking about our research that kind of create this fictionality in our research, that, you know, this kind of artificial parallel universe that we create when we do research? And I think that there is another important and relevant thing is about what constitutes relevant data. What is data? Because you said that the data that you produce in this kind of conversation are not considered to be really data. You said something like that, Fidel. And I think that there are different aspects and this kind of dichotomies that the research process itself creates about who is the researcher, who is the participant, who is the subject of the research, who is the object, you know. Breaking these kind of dichotomies can create new ways of thinking and doing research. So I think that, yes, it's a very interesting idea. And also you are talking about portraits rather than descriptions of things. Is this separation necessary? How can we work through, how can we transform this separation into new ways of thinking about what we do when we do research and so on?
Absolutely. And actually going back, picking up on portraits, because I was saying we use portraits as a whole overarching metaphor in the first book in the series. And you could consider maybe using portraits as a metaphor in your chapter as well, if it appeals, you know, not to impose it in any way, but it just, Marco is right. It's something that jumps out when you talk about portraits.
I certainly would, because literally I can try to imagine a researcher, then imagine an activist, maybe, I don't know, a normal person. And this whole idea of the sort of being an object of research, being a subject of research, and the two of them are intertwined. You can't separate them, and yet obviously academia wants us to have this whole idea of a priori, you know, acknowledge it and sometimes leave it outside. But how can you do it? Because I'm an activist anyway, so I can't change. I'm not going to be the conventional academic people are looking for, and I have to do things slightly differently. And I'm very sure there are other people who, I'm not alone. There are many people outside there who think the same, but sometimes we keep quiet. And because we keep quiet, people ignore our presence.
And exactly, this is the philosophy of the book. Like, this is a space for those who feel that they cannot express the creativity or their doubts, or that they feel that what they are thinking about, in this case, the way they do the research is not is not well received. But actually, Alex, have you seen, there is another interesting question, and thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, please do send us an abstract. Is it from Mark Gatto?
Yeah.
Would you like to ask it out loud, if you don't mind?
Hi, Alex.
Hi,
Marco.
Thanks
so much for the book. Good to see you too. Yeah, I suppose, I'm sorry if I did miss this earlier. Just interested in the audience of the book. A lot of what has been discussed is very much what I'm aligned with. And I'm just conscious of how we reproduce conventions in our teaching with students. And it's kind of making sure there's the safe route to getting the paths. And suppose perhaps thinking about research methods when students are doing capstone projects, how do we encourage them to be a bit more risk-taking and reward that risk in how we assess them as well. I don't know if that's something that would be a potentially interesting chapter. It's just occurred to me as I was engaging with your session today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And I think in terms of the audience of the book, I would really hope that research students and even master students could read it, as well as academics, so that we can open these possibilities up for them early. But also in terms of having a chapter on teaching research methods differently, I think would be really nice as well, because you're right. I mean, like, not only do we get stuck in conventional methods, but we also get stuck in how we teach methods. And of course, teaching research methods is really, well, it's quite an industry, isn't it? Because if you look, for example, at the Financial Times top business texts for teaching power, all the top ones are research methods books. And I know that because I've got a chapter in one of them in Saunders et al., right, which is like #1, I think. So, but you know, it's the teaching research methods is a huge industry, is really important, and it would be really good if we could challenge that and how it's done as well. So I think I would be very, very open to a chapter on that. What do you think, Marco?
No, absolutely. And I think that this is important, especially because I'm thinking about my experience when I was doing my PhD, and I was thinking about, I tried to make my methodological chapter, for example, differently. And while I was writing it, I was thinking that it is different for students to be kind of creative, because you feel like, oh, will I take a bad grade if I'm not doing, you know, there is this level of expectation about what is considered to be a good or bad a choice in terms of methodology. So if this book can legitimize the fact that creative, innovative, different approaches to doing research are valid, there is space for them. So we can, you know, we can inform the way we teach, we can inform the way we think about it, since, you know, since that stage when you don't feel that you can be creative because, you know, you've taken too much of a risk, which is also valid when you are a very experienced researcher, because then you will be the journals, they would, you know, you will feel the constraint from the point of view. But I definitely think that at the same time with this book, we don't want to be normative that everyone needs to do things differently, because I've always been very convinced that there is not a best way to do research. Quantitative research or statistical research is not better or worse than doing narrative analysis or any other qualitative form of research. So it is really opening up the possibilities for researchers at every stage of their research, at their career, students, and so on. So of course the audience is hopefully wide, and yeah, happy to see that idea turning into a chapter.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Mark.
And Joshua, I think you got another question. Please go ahead.
Just following on from Mark, that speaks exactly to my experience as it does with Marco, getting a really simplified vanilla version of methods training and then having...
So sorry, you're a bit quiet. You're a bit quiet. Do you want to turn
my headphones connected? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I just wanted to jump in because I agree with Marco that your argument, Mark, completely reflected my undergraduate training as well, and mostly my graduate training. And I guess following on from that, then a question I have is that I would probably, if I were to contribute a chapter, I would write a sentence speaking to that vanilla methods training that we usually receive. So is there an opportunity towards the end, this is probably thinking too far in the future, to be able to cross-cite others' chapters and others' work in more finalized versions of this? Because I'm assuming there's a lot of kind of pieces of the conversation that have never been formalized into a chapter. It doesn't exist yet, hence the book. Therefore, there might be a nice way, it might feel a really good citation for some of these topics that we discuss.
Marco, do you want to respond?
I will definitely love a conversation inside the book. It would be great. It would be amazing because you are already starting the conversation from within the book and creating these synergies between different disciplines, different ways of doing research. And we hope actually to have very different examples and ideas from different fields, and creating this connection will kind of generate, thinking about the sort of legitimization, like we need to speak about these things, and we need to feel confident about our ideas and this conversation. But don't be worried if your idea, you don't have a citation for your idea. I mean, this is the point. You're maybe thinking about something that you haven't read yet, or there's no one has already thought yet. It can be, don't feel like you need to have a solid ground in your idea. If your idea is strong enough and is well thought, and it arises from a need or from your personal experience, because we all have different experiences and different way of reacting to the thing that happened when we do our research. So I think freedom, Alex, you stressed the word freedom a few times during your talk earlier. So yes, I think this is one of the freedom, creativity, and probably joy in doing this.
Yeah, we really want to open this up. If you don't want to cite anyone, you don't have to cite anyone. I mean, feel free to reimagine the space. And again, conversations, very important, and we can have a discussion. So one of the things that was very nice that we ended up doing with the first book in the series was that the authors, actually, it was also during COVID and lockdowns, where people were really keen to talk to each other online because everybody was so isolated. The authors actually asked, whilst we're writing the chapters, can we meet regularly as a community? Some of the people who are involved are here, so we can just discuss our ideas and how we can shape our chapters. And so we ended up doing that, and we had several quite regular sort of meetings where people could share what they were thinking of doing, and other authors would give them ideas. And actually some chapters ended up being shaped based on ideas, suggestions by other authors, which is really nice, because it's really nice to kind of challenge and overcome that notion that this has to be a competition, that we can help each other, and if we can create conversations outside the book, conversations and transcend the book, but also conversations can shape the book themselves. So I don't know if hopefully that answers your questions, Joshua. But any ideas you have, you and all of you and potential authors, of how we can do this are very welcome, because again, I want to emphasize that we want this to be a community project that is shaped collectively, and we incorporated several really creative ideas from the authors in the first book. Like, for example, someone said, can we have a gift shop at the end? If it's a portrait gallery, can we have a gift shop? So our last conclusion chapter in the book is a gift shop, where different authors contributed items for that gift shop, and you can walk around the gift shop and you can take away souvenirs that represent different chapters in the book. So that was a suggestion from the author. So again, if you guys have ideas for how we can exciting things and conversations and what we can do with this book, then they're very, very welcome. I hope that's not overwhelming.
Awesome, thank you.
Right. Carolyn, I think you're next.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to thank you for organizing this interactive workshop. And I felt hooked by the notion of providing a glimpse behind the polished account of research. I think that was on one of your slides, and that's perfect. I'm a researcher who likes doing action research. and action research is inherently messy. But when you look at publications, mine included, describing the process of collecting and analyzing data, the manuscripts are always polished and they don't talk about the messiness. And my question to you is, would it make sense to discuss this messiness in a selected action research method and reflect on peer review processes? So when I read your call for book chapters, I thought, oh, okay, I have an experience with a messy research process. And I felt forced to polish my manuscript and hide the messiness. So is it possible to reflect on this, compare my experiences with other researchers' experiences using the same method, and even cite parts of the reviewers' comments? Is this allowed, or does this provide any issues with, for instance, because we would reflect on a project that has already been published, among others?
Do you want to go first, Marco?
Okay. Thank you, Caroline, for your contribution. Thank you for what you just said. I will definitely be interested in something that reflects on the relationship between the messiness of the research project and the reviewers of the paper that kind of reduce this messiness. I think that reviewers have a very strong power in affecting the way we present and also think about it, because when you start thinking about this, when you start thinking about the research process in itself, you already think in a way that is able to be translated into a written text, and then you have the pressure to make it good for publication, and then this is the role that the reviewer plays into this stage. So yes, absolutely. I don't have experience in action research, but I have experience in ethnographic research, and I think I understand that when you talk about messiness, I think I completely understand about that, and especially because we have to tell stories also about what we did. And what is this story? Is it a reproduction of what happened, or is it a completely new, version of what really happened? Just why we do that? Are we doing that because we have to do it, because otherwise it would be impossible to translate it into written text? So we'll definitely be interested in something like that, to reflect on that specific and very interesting relationship that researchers have with reviewers and publisher and editors and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And to add to that, Caroline, also good to see you again. Hope you're doing well. I do have experience of action research and trying to publish it. And my experience was basically before even submitting the paper, I was told, don't frame it as action research. And in another case, we did frame it as action research, and we were saying, don't frame it as action research, because this is not action research, because you haven't jumped through all the hoops, that are required for this to count as action research. You would have thought that action research is research where you take action, right? But that in practice is not the case. It's much more narrowly defined. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to challenge, is this narrow proceduralism of methods. So we ended up reframing it in the paper as engaged ethnography, right? Because that allowed us a participant engaged ethnography or whatever, I can't remember exactly. So then we didn't have to jump through those hoops. But yes, that's exactly would fit very well with this kind of first idea of showing how methods are already done differently, and what are the barriers from more creative and joyful use of methods. And I think the publication system is definitely worth exposing in that regard.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And well, actually, I didn't have to reframe action research as something else, and I'm grateful for that. But nonetheless, I think I had to provide more justifications. So compared to other research projects where I used conventional methods, so sometimes I do quantitative research, which is very conventional, and I rarely have to justify my methodological choices in such a way. So action research seems to be different, and especially when it comes to data analysis, because the data that you generate with participants, especially when you try to co-create knowledge with research participants, it's messy. And there is no one best way to analyze the data. And I think it's worth reflecting on this. So thank you so much for your feedback, Marco and Alex. Good to see you today.
Good to see you, and no problem. And we hope to see something from you, Carolyn.
And also picking up, Carolyn, thank you for what you just said, because I'm picking up from what you just said. And you said that the messiness is not, it's in all stages, but you can focus, for example, on the analysis, you can focus on the data collection, which I prefer calling data production, because, you know, collecting data, it raises a lot of different ideas about what is data and what's not. So yes, I mean, I think that I'm really into the idea of showing the messiness, and probably that also raises another issue, how you show messiness in a system of, you know, in language, which is an ordered way of, and as an ordered system. So these, yeah, definitely, it would be probably into the second area, but also in the first. Hopefully, can produce some ideas for the third. How can we, if methodology is an ordered thing, how can we go beyond this view? Alex, do we have a few?
And just to add to that point, is like what we've seen so far is we're definitely getting more ideas for kind of like, if we wanted to think of in terms of those 3 questions in progressive radicality, so far we're definitely getting more ideas for the sort of first and second, and possibly only 1 or 2 for the third. So if you're still wondering what you can do and you're choosing between things, and you can think of something particularly radical, we would encourage you to develop that, because of course it's also the hardest one, right? How can we be really radical? Do we really need methods? And what comes after methods potentially? We haven't got as much in terms of people saying, I'm going to do something on that. So not necessarily for you, Carolyn, just a general comment coming out of this discussion. So
for that side, I think is interesting. I think, do we really need methods, or we just need theories, for example? Do we need to, if we think about method as a procedure, do we need that? Or we only can stick to the theories? Do theories are enough? So we, you know, this kind of reasoning would be related to the thinking differently about the idea itself of having methods. Of course, you always have methodologies, but is it really the point?
Mm-hmm. And also related to that is, why do we do methods actually? Do we do methods because they're genuinely conducive to doing good research or meaningful research that we want to do? Or do we do methods because we have to, because we're told to, because it's safe, you know, because without methods we cannot publish and cannot be legitimate academics? So it's those sort of questions. And if it's the latter, you know, why do we put up with it? So I think that those are some really interesting questions. I think UJ, you got a hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sorry, it was just a little delayed, my computer. My name is Jamil. I'm at McGill University, so thank you for organizing this session. I have 2 thoughts. So let me just preface this by saying my field is very different. I come from critical Muslim studies. My graduate training was in sociology and in politics, but I've been sort of following a lot more about what's been happening in sort of organizational studies, just because you're doing interesting things that are of interest to me. So that's my preface. Now, my thought is, in reaction to what you've just said, it's something also I was thinking about, the relationship between methods and knowledge production. So as a disciplinary concern, obviously, like in terms of graduate training, but also an interdisciplinary concern as academics in thinking about the work that we're doing. So I have a paper right now that I'm doing for something else. And so I'd like to maybe see if I can extrapolate some ideas for that, for what you're doing. So these are my thoughts. The paper is on critiquing the idea of critical in knowledge production specifically in Islamic studies and Muslim studies, because my work is on critical. So my conclusion after going through various things is to show how critical Muslim studies is actually addressing critical in a way that is post-positivist, a critique of Eurocentrism and things like that. So the examples are very specific to the discipline. And so I'm wondering whether there is a conversation to be had that is actually above a particular discipline, and that's perhaps a little bit more theoretical or philosophical, I mean, whatever you want to call it, which thinks about methods not in isolation, but as part of the work that we do as knowledge, in the production of knowledge in academia. So if I'm making a connection here between academia as a system of knowledge production, and there are critiques to be made of that as well. So anyway, so I'm just putting that out there. Is that an idea that would be of interest? And how do you think one could do that in a productive way, given that I'm not from your discipline? So thank you.
Do you want to take that one first, Marco?
I don't know. I think I need to think a little bit more about that. First thing, even if you are not in business management, organization studies, as we said, absolutely fine. I mean, this is the kind of argument that we were having, like, absolutely we need to have a conversation with all the disciplines, and your contribution is extremely valuable, even if you come from a different background. I think your idea sounds really interesting. I'm really interested on what you just said about the notion of critique and the post-positivistic take on critique as something, when you are criticizing something because you are finding flaws in a reasoning or a methodology. While I definitely think we need to start thinking about the idea of critique or criticizing something in a productive and more affirmative way rather than, negative or destructive. So I think that if you can apply the kind of reasoning to the idea of methodology and knowledge production, it sounds amazing and really interesting. Of course, it depends on how you develop the idea, but so far the idea sounds very good. So feel free to continue this conversation, like send us a few lines or words about your idea so we can kind of make it show that you are going in the direction of the but I'm sure that even listening to this conversation was hopefully some helpful. Alex, if you want to add something about that.
No, I think that would be really, really good, actually, and it could actually contribute to the third question of what comes after method, and in at least in some way. So I would encourage you to develop that. And I think I am personally keen to have other disciplines, especially because, as I was saying in conversation with Joshua, we have common struggles actually across disciplines, and that definitely relates to methods and methodological considerations. And I think using your discipline as an example and then abstracting it, as you were saying, to a higher sort of like philosophical level, that could be really good, because that could help find those connections, whichever discipline the reader is coming from for this book. So I would agree with Marco and encourage you, please send us an abstract, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
And also because we can think about methodologies from a geographical perspective, from a disciplinary perspective, from a cultural perspective. So there are different ways of understanding methodology, different ways of understanding how to do research. So definitely considering your discipline, but yeah, it would be an interesting and stimulating idea.
Wonderful. We've had fantastic discussion. Thank you all so much for contributing. We've now done almost an hour and a half, and people have been having to leave, and I'm sure you also probably hungry or want a break or whatever. So Thank you all very much. We're going to draw to a close. Mark, could you put the slides back up just to wrap up? If any of you want to ask more questions, but we run out of time, or you would prefer to talk separately, then please just email us and we'll get back to you. I know some of you, at least some of you who haven't said anything today, have sent us something via the form. So we'll just be back in touch with you on that. So yes, thank you all very much. Fantastic discussions. I can already see a community building, which is great. Could you show the next slide, please?
Yes.
Marco, wonderful. So now back, my CMS in Touch hat is back on, and I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Marco. This way I would normally thank the presenters, so I guess I have to thank myself, and the CMS in Touch team behind the scenes. If you find this event interesting, this recording of this event will be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So you can then, if you want to revisit, listen to it again, look at the slides, you'll be able to find it there. Just search for CMS in Touch on YouTube and you'll find our channel. We do have forthcoming events, but our big forthcoming event this year is that we're helping to organize the first ever Organization Journal virtual conference, which has a really exciting theme. Well, I think it is organizing critical solidarities amidst a divisive world. Reveal, reconnect, reimagine, rehearse, and revolt for social justice. So if you're interested, I guess, in doing research methods differently, this could also appeal to you. It's a 100% online, 100% free conference, and you'll find more information by pointing your phone at that QR code there. So, and further events will be announced soon. So once again, thank you all. Do join us for future CMS in Touch events. You can follow us on Twitter, and if you're interested in joining, contributing to CMS in Touch in any shape or form, whether by organizing your own events. So we're completely community driven. So if you have an event you want to run through CMS in Touch, just get in touch, and we're always completely free and completely open. So we'll do it for you and with you, or join the team. We're always looking for volunteers. So on that, without further ado, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.